Hi, I'm Michelle Olivier, and you're listening to Hey, I Want Your Job, the podcast that looks at amazing jobs and what it takes to get them. Hi, and welcome to Hey, I Want Your Job. Today, we have somebody who is doing one of the most important jobs out there at the moment, for which we are all intensely grateful and about which there has been an unusual amount of controversy this year, which is weird. So please welcome Jon. And Jon, what is your job title?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me on, Michelle. I don't know if I can say I represent all teachers. I think that would be super presumptuous, but we thank you in your spirit of thanking us. I think everyone needs to be thanking everyone in this time. But a little intro about me. I'm Jon Hinthorne. I'm a Spanish teacher, a high school Spanish teacher, and I currently work at Central Coast New Tech High in Napomo, California. It's a small town just south of San Luis Obispo, in between LA and San Francisco. Our school is unique in the sense that all of us are unconventional teachers. I also started up a podcast recently and a community of folks and educators and teachers that are wanting to do things that are unconventional in the classroom. And the more I unpack this, the more I realize that I'm at a special school that takes on project-based learning in a real way. All of our students move away from book learning to project-based learning. So that's me. I'm a high school Spanish teacher, and I've started a podcast and a community that think like me and act like me.
You've already said something that's exciting to me. So you said that everybody at your school is an unconventional teacher. And I know that's what your podcast is
Yes.
about. This is like sort of a mini movement you've started.
Mm-hmm.
I got to know, what do you have to do to constitute being an unconventional teacher? Does this mean like if you're from the LGBTQ community, you're automatically in the club because
Sure.
you're not a conventional life path? Or what does that
Yeah.
mean to be an unconventional teacher?
Well, there's multiple definitions of unconventional, right? And this is a new project for me. This is a new endeavor. We just started in November of 2020.
Okay.
So I don't want to presume that I have all the answers now. I'm in discovery mode, and
Okay.
I have had 18 interviews with some of the most remarkable educators, that some of which I didn't know existed on the globe, right? There's millions of teachers around the globe. We just went international last night. We talked to Jamia Drummond Bay, who's a keynote speaker. She's a TED resident. She is like one of the best teachers known in countries like South Korea. She lives in Malaysia, and I didn't even know that Jamia existed before we started here.
Oh,
So
wow.
why I say that is as soon as you start asking the question in the education community of
Hmm.
what makes you unconventional, you realize that the answer is most teachers do at least a few things that are a little bit non-traditional, right? Most teachers do something, they take some sort of thing like textbook learning and they alter it because they want to meet their students in their community where they're at.
Yeah.
Right. All of our work is not taking the Hufflin Mifflin textbook and all of us attributing it to our students in the same way. Our work is trying to say, okay, what are the standards? What are the things that we need our students to be able to do by the end of the year? And how do we get our unique students to be able to do those and have fun while doing it? Right. So fun and love are key elements of being an unconventional teacher. I don't know if you ever had educators. I certainly did, that sat at a desk and threw sort of packets at us, and we had no fun in the classroom and therefore complained about it the whole time. And God bless those folks for taking on the role of teacher. Anybody that takes on the role of teacher, there's no bad teacher out there, but there is bad teaching, and I've
Yeah.
been the culprit of it. I have seen it. And I try to avoid it like the plague. I try to invest so much energy and so much love in my classroom that my students look at me and say, wait a second, we haven't had this before. Or there's only been a few other teachers where we've had this sense of connectedness, and we know you care so much. They call me senor because I teach Spanish.
Hmm.
And they say, senor, oh my gosh, you love us so much, because I tell them that I love them. Right. And these
Hmm.
things seem like, oh my gosh, of course, every teacher loves their students, but Of course they do, but to what degree do you tell them and show them? So that's one element of that makes you unconventional. And then we can get it into some methods and some teacher moves later on in the interview if you'd like. But those are the
Yes,
things that kind of
we'll
stick
talk
out.
about that in a second, but I want to just kind of revisit. So I think one of the things that's exciting about what you're talking about is that it seems like unconventional is like the new cool for
Mhm.
teachers. That it's the way you're talking about it makes it sound like everybody wants to be somehow outside of the box and doing something new and doing something different. And I think that a lot of some of people's personal experience, like what you're talking about, says differently.
Sure.
And certainly the bad press that teachers get
Yeah.
says differently as well. So talk to me about being an unconventional teacher in the age of insane level of standardized testing and
Yes.
scrutinization. I
Hmm.
know that the teachers in my family and in my life, their biggest complaint is
Hmm.
that they have to spend so much of their time justifying their own existence
Yes.
that it's really hard to do the job that they were hired to do. So
Hmm.
how do those things come together in a classroom and in a personal life and still breathe and not want to kill everybody?
Sure. Well, policy for your listeners that aren't familiar with it, No Child Left Behind was sort of this
Mhm.
launch of making sure that each classroom and each schoolhouse in each district was doing what was expected of them,
Mhm.
right? And it kind of came from accountability from when I measure, and it also came to from an equity standpoint in saying that there were some schools that were not performing at a level that other schools were performing at, and they were asking why, and they wanted some more data, right? They wanted some more real life data, sort of real time data,
Yep.
in order to understand how their students were performing, and so that they could move, right? So that they could change if they needed to. Um, Now, fast forward 20, 30 years from that, and you're looking at a completely new landscape for education, really for humanity, right? Most of us are at home 90% of the time now to save ourselves from this incredible, incredible threat of COVID-19. Some of my teacher friends are in school teaching, including my
Mhm.
brother in St. Louis. He's teaching his first graders, but he's got 7 kids that are brave enough to walk in the classroom, and the rest of them are on virtual learning. This entire landscape has shifted.
Mhm.
So we've moved from a conversation of test or no test. How do you get students to achieve on a test? My answer is real short on that one. It's talk about the test as little as you can.
Yeah.
I've gotten a chance to work at 2 incredible schools over the past 7 years. The first one was just south of San Jose, California, in Morgan Hill, and I'll give them a shout out because they deserve it. They were one of the first charter schools in the Bay Area called the Charter School of Morgan Hill. Now, I got a job there with these incredible people, and they never talked about the test. But guess who had some of the highest test scores in the
Yeah.
district? That school. So I've always taught Spanish. We don't have a standardized test, so this doesn't touch me, intimately in my classroom. But
Yeah.
I have all my colleagues are teaching English and math and social studies and science, and they're pained by this. They're threatened by this sometimes, and they're definitely have a sense of anxiety around it because some of the first days when you get back in your professional development is somebody puts a packet of your test scores. And I've been in schools. I've worked. This is my 6th school now across the nation, from St. Louis to Boston to San Jose and now Central Coast of California. And I can tell you that intimidates teachers, right? To have
Mhm.
your numbers compared to other people. And then you put them in this place where they're stepped back and they're sort of anxious. And that's just not, in my opinion, what we should be doing with our teachers. We should be celebrating picking them up. And I think test scores tend to pin students and parents and other things. Now, I'm not a proponent of getting rid of tests. I think the tests give us data, but they're just one data point, right?
Yeah.
The other data points I think are way more important. I will tell you just a follow up that my current school also doesn't talk about the test, and we have the second highest test scores in the county.
So
Um,
there's a lot to unpack from your answer. So I'm going to
yes,
try to take it in pieces. First, the easy one. Oh my God, Morgan Hill. Nobody ever knows where Morgan Hill is. My parents lived
yes.
there for like 9
Oh,
years.
great,
So
nice.
like I actually know Morgan Hill really well. So that was the
That's
easy
awesome.
one. So I think that one of the other interesting things about education and the difficulties with programs like No Child Left Behind, which try
Mhm.
to fix things at a national level,
Right.
is that there's so much regionality.
Hmm.
And, having moved from state to state, I'm sure you absolutely can speak to that, but it makes it difficult as well, I think, for educators to be supportive at a big level because it's hard to know as an educator in California, do you really know the how to support the educators in Texas with
Yeah.
what they're going through? I mean, you should because
Yeah.
you're all teaching kids, but at the same time, the outside pressures being put on, I think, make that so much harder. And I think that's why some of the stuff that you're doing around being unconventional teachers and sort of thinking outside the test and outside of the traditional norms, I think is really important.
Yeah.
Um, then I think the other thing that all of that made me want to say was I also think that one of education is unique insofar as in most types of business, but obviously education is a business, even if we like to tell ourselves
Sure.
it's just about the children.
It
But in
is.
most areas in our world, people have a whole slew of competing notions and values which come from different levels of virtue, right? Like
Hmm.
sometimes it is just about making a buck, and that's okay. But
Hmm.
in education, even the most badly, worst conceived ideas all come from this really true desire to help children.
Right.
And so that is both easier and so much harder, I think,
Yes.
because on the one hand, we all agree that we're here to help the kids.
Right.
On the other hand, we are all like, we can't dismiss something as that is awful or evil or not in line with our values because they all at least come from the values. Does that make
Hmm.
sense?
Sure. Well, you can't fake it either, right? You and I both have young kids,
Yeah.
and we were talking offline before this. You can't fake having a child that's kind. You have to grow it. You have to model it. You have
Yeah.
to day in, day out, moment to moment, consistently give them the boundaries, those guideposts, right? So that they know what is right and what is not. And the teaching's the same thing. Whether your student needs wider guideposts, right, to fit with their different needs. Maybe they're a student with special needs, or they're a student that's just straight and narrow and they're going to get it done independently. You have all of those different types of things. So you have to widen the guidepost to include everyone.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden drive to a place, an end game, right, with these standardized tests and state standards, where everyone hypothetically is going to end up, right, if we're achieving proficiency with our students.
Absolutely.
And that's just
And
academics. So it's
I
a
think
very complicated situation.
it is. And we know that tests are almost always a poor measure. Like, right, there is no single
Sure.
test that does a good job of measuring every student because
It's one mark.
students
Yeah.
engage, have different learning. And again, I'm not trying to educate you on this so much as I'm looking for you to agree and tell me when I'm
Sure.
wrong, but also just to educate our listeners that, because student human beings are so different,
Hmm.
and you have people who engage well with written documents, people who don't. You have test anxiety, you have learning difficulties, a whole
Hmm.
sea of things that make those problematic. But then when we put all of the weight of funding, and I know in
Hmm.
some areas whether or not teachers get to keep their job
Yeah.
comes down to how did your students perform on this test.
Yeah. Sure.
It makes it I think it winds up making education about a test instead of about the whole person and making them kind and caring and the things that
Yeah.
you're talking about. What if
Well,
the on
that makes me that makes just real quick that makes me think about this incredible idea that one of my mentors looked at me one day and said when I was complaining. Initially kind of complaining about these systems that we're talking about. This is the
Mhm.
testing system or the business system right around schools and stuff. And he looks at me and he says, "We failed as soon as we make schools about the adults." And he basically told me to be quiet. After that, he said, "We have failed, you and I, because we're talking about you and I. This is about our students. This
Yeah.
is about our parents. and our communities and our libraries and our basketball games. This is about bringing together humans around a common cause of education, of growing as a human, both socio-emotionally as well as academically. Let's keep it there. And he sort of told me to sit down and shut up, sit down, be quiet, and kind of know your place. And it was from then on that whenever I felt myself complaining or talking about the tests or feeling lonely or, virtual learning this, virtual learning that, I have his message in the back of my mind says, wait a second, Jon, pivot and realize that this is about the students. And as soon as I do that, a smile goes on my face. I go jump on my Zoom calls. We use Google Meet. I go on my Google Meet, and there I see 25 to 35 shining faces ready. And it's that moment that you feel the sense of rigor, the sense of ownership, the sense of urgency that I don't know if I've ever felt before, right? You have I have more students not doing anything and it's sort of MIA, logging in. Maybe 10 out of my 140 haven't done anything yet in the semester that I have seen yet, that they've turned in. But still the other 126 are there and they're ready. And that just gives you a charge. That gets you ready. And any educator has felt that before. If you have any educators listening right now, which I think you do, and some of my listeners hopefully will listen, we feel that energy, and it gets us out of our sync, and it gets us out of like this test or no test, or am I have my job or not? And then quite frankly, if you step up to the plate and you take on those curveballs, I don't think you have to worry about your job. I think the other stuff goes away because your students then are enjoying themselves. They're not going home to whomever is raising them, mom, dad, foster parent, grandma, grandpa, and complaining about Spanish class, English class, or math class, which then gets to your principal, and the principal then gets upset. And that's kind of where these sort of balls start rolling. You say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing. And that's where I think you start getting into these tough places. I've been there. I've inadvertently said the wrong thing. Then the principal comes in, you have to apologize, all that sort of stuff. And of course I did. But when you keep it about the students and you keep it grounded in why we're here and our mission, we are here to support parents in raising these kids to be quality, happy, kind human beings and contribute to our society. None. Game, set, match. That's it.
So
that's what the school's about.
Take that enthusiasm you've got about the Zoom and the online learning, and I want to kind of wind back to the clock. Not quite 12 months, but frighteningly close. To
March
last
2020.
There we go. More like April. When I think it was like mid-April, when everybody in the entire country and probably the world suddenly valued what you do more than ever before. Yeah. And like the internet was just full of every meme about how we were going to shower you in rose petals and buy you anything you could ever want for your classroom. We were going to increase your pay to 6 figures starting because God love you.
Yeah.
Jon, what happened?
Well,
that's not what your September was. If your September was anything like it was here, what do you think happened?
Well, I mean, the brass tacks, the reality is that the pandemic got worse, and people started hurting more, and more people ended up dying. And not to get too morbid, but that's what happened. You had people go back to school, and a lot of people get ill, and I have teachers around the country that are losing their lives. So that's what happened. And I think it, it's like the hierarchy of needs, and if people are hurting to get food on the table or feel right, then the things like education and play and all these other creativity outlets that we have, I'm a piano musician, they go out the window because you're just trying to get food on the table and you're trying to feel better. Right. And so I think it's happening at such a level. And then you have all these emotional baggage, and weights and different things of us being in our houses for a year plus. This is causing a major issue. And then you throw on to it, my students are 15, 16, and 17. literally at the crux of their identity creation, their formation. They're starting to bring their identity to a solidified form, right? By trying on different identities.
Mhm.
And you now say you're going to sit in your room
Yeah.
for pretty much the entire day. I
And
know
watch
as a
people on a
shy
screen.
high schooler, I would have, and I tell my students this all the time, I would not be in a good place right now.
Yeah.
I would be asking for help. Well, probably not asking for help, but people would be asking to help me because this is hard. And then we get those students in front of us, and there's the opportunity, right? So what happened with that is, one, the business end of things, we can't be paid more, right? We don't value on a national level. Big businesses give grants to organizations that support education, but not oftentimes the schools themselves because of the limitations of things. We get funded $10,000, $11,000 per student, and don't quote me on that number, but because it's different by state, per student, and if they show up.
Yeah.
Right. So that's how most schools are funded. And then you have the basic aid schools that are in places that they can raise a lot more money through property taxes, and they don't need any government funding. And they have art programs and music programs and kilns and great uniforms for their football players, and
Yeah.
and more power to them. The education system is so impossible to put your mind around because it's so complicated. There's so many different types of schools, from private to public to pilot to charter to magnet school. I mean, there's so many people out there trying to, going back to the unconventional thing, be unconventional so that they can satisfy their clients, so that their students are enjoying themselves. Going back to my main point of this interview, so that they're enjoying themselves and they're going to be more quality contributors to our society. So that would be awesome if that was all we had to deal with. But now all these needs are way more important, and these emotional needs and these getting food on the table. I mean, I was just at the supermarket and they were doing this giant campaign to give to folks in our area. And we live in a relatively affluent area. On the Central Coast, it's kind of a retirement community, right, of people from LA and San Francisco. And just a few of us young families are trying to make it on single salaries and teacher salaries and renting houses, and just like scraping by. But they were doing another food drive. And I think this is like number 5 that are organized. And so I think that's where I'm thinking, I'm not going to hold the parents or whoever were running those memes. Teachers were running the memes and everyone, and that's flattery, right? We love that. If for a moment you thought about anybody's job with a sense of empathy, that's great, right? I have a lot of empathy for other positions. I had 2 babies in a hospital. I don't usually go to the hospital. Now I have the most amount of love and empathy for nurses, 12-hour shifts and
Absolutely. Yeah.
incredible work, right? So I think that's what your program's about. Hey, I want your job. From my perspective, I think you're trying to give a window into these incredible positions, and we're all working incredibly hard. So when you get
Absolutely.
everyone working really hard, no, I don't think teachers necessarily deserve an extra special treatment. Would it be nice on a personal level? Sure. An extra 10, 15 grand. We could then maybe start thinking about saving for our kids or buying a house or doing all these other things that other people get to do with larger salaries. But then you realize it doesn't matter. Life is so short that if you're not contributing and you're not doing something that you're passionate about, these are kind of words from my parents now, you might as well,
Yep.
try to figure out a job that you can do that. You either work to do something that you love, or your job is something that you love. And I got to do the latter. My job is something that I love. It's not work. Well, maybe grading on a Saturday 136 projects, that
I
might
say
be
there's
work.
definitely some work with the job.
That might be
Let's
work.
not
Yeah.
go too far. Don't give the haters an excuse. So I
Yeah.
want to piggyback on something you said and kind of pivot a minute. We're talking more about that the unconventional teaching part
Mhm.
is new ways of showing love, new ways of being
Yeah.
engaged and invited with your kids. So I have extremely limited knowledge in your area. The only one I know about is project-based learning,
Sure.
which I think is amazing. As a learner myself, it's probably one of the ways that I learn best
Oh my gosh, it's
is
so good.
So, but I am going to not give a lay definition of that. I'm going
Mhm.
to let you speak a little bit to PBL, but
Yeah.
then I want you to educate me. What are the
Mhm.
other things out there? Right now, PBL is really in vogue with
Mhm.
education. Everybody's talking about it. There's 1,000 conferences when we have conferences about how
Mhm.
to incorporate it.
Mhm.
What are the sleepy things that are happening that aren't getting as much press, but probably should?
Sure. So PBL is project-based learning, just to kind of give a
Yep.
definition from my perspective, because I work at a PBL school.
Oh, wow.
And I also want to just let you know that the previous school in Morgan Hill was also a PBL school. So these are schools that have put a stamp on their methodology, right?
Mhm.
Their pedagogy, their ways of teaching and giving a student and parent and community experience where, in a nutshell, to me, PBL, project-based learning, is learning by doing an authentic task and answering a really fun and engaging question, right? So
Yep.
you set out this really fun and engaging question. The current question that my students in Spanish 1 are answering is, where should Senor Hinthorne travel next in the Spanish speaking country? It's not, how can I learn this travel vocab and spit it back to you on on a vocab quiz?
Yeah.
We're doing that. They're learning how to say el pasaporte, el viaje. They're getting all those words, but it is couched and sort of in this larger theme, this larger question of trying to get a trip for my two sons and my wife to go, when COVID lifts, to another wonderful place in Latin America. I've been to 9 countries, been blessed to do so. And so I give them a budget of about $6,000, a really real life budget.
Mhm.
And then they go out and they do research on TripAdvisor, and they do all this real life stuff and try to use math and realize, oh, I can't send him to Equatorial Guinea because each ticket is $2,000, so he can't go there. So
Absolutely.
high schooler, they're getting all these budgetary sort of
Yep.
tangential things. Math in the Spanish classroom, they're getting culture in the Spanish classroom, instead of just opening, as I always say, to page 212 and doing numbers 1 through 8.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
212, 1 through 8 is part of my curriculum too. We go and practice the verbs. We go and practice saying things and pronouncing and learning the alphabet. We do all that stuff, but we also get a chance for them to put together a pitch to me on my next trip. So that's PBL. It's not the only way, but I think, looking at it from a student perspective, it's one of the most engaging ways to learn.
Yeah,
And I'm like you, I would have loved to learn through PBL.
absolutely.
I have undiagnosed dyslexia, so memorization for me and reading for me is incredibly difficult and taxing. And so I
Mhm,
didn't do it growing up. I figured
mhm,
out ways to get around it.
mhm.
And then if so, there's that. And then the other kind of sleepy stuff that you're talking about is that's just starting to come. I'm a part of, as all of these groups, especially with this new podcast thing, I'm getting in contact with all these thought pioneers
Uh-huh.
in education. And what they're talking about right now are 3 things. They're talking about socio emotional learning, where we step out and we create lesson plans and experiences and check-ins with our students on a consistent basis to make sure that they're doing okay, that they have support as a human, and that they're being kind and doing all those things that you and I as a parent would maybe make sure, right? We're supporting the parents, either where there's a void, right? A chosen void or an
Uh-huh.
unchosen
Yeah.
void. And we're doing that. So social emotional learning is a real life thing. Every Friday, we meet with an advisory in my school, in my district. And all we do is we let our hair down, we get to know the students, and we chat and we check in, and maybe we have a topic that we share. The other things that are going around is
Wait, I want to
trauma.
pause you. I want
Yeah,
to
go
pause
for
you
it.
because
Yeah,
that one, I'm super excited about that, but I have questions.
good.
So, there is so much pushback
Hmm.
in I live in Texas, which is a super conservative place to
Hmm.
be, and every time teachers try to do anything that is outside of, the textbook, they
Yeah,
get pushback from parents
sure,
like, it's not your job to raise my kid. Don't tell
sure,
my kid's emotions are not your problem, blah blah blah. And then at the
sure.
same time, people want to get pissy and blame teachers that we have no emotional IQ in, in our workforce. And so like you get it both ways, bless you.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so talk to me about, do you get with that sort of emotional 360 curriculum, do you get that pushback from parents? Do
You
they,
know,
have you heard the stay in your lane, bruv? I mean,
oh yeah, definitely. Year 14, you've gotten it all at this point.
at
Like,
least twice.
yeah, I've been pushed by a parent,
Oh,
in some situations where I was trying to tell them that they needed to stay until 5 o'clock. And I guess it was like a weird situation. I don't know if I should have brought that up, but because without context, it's hard to understand what was going
but
on. And,
you've had it
um,
all. So yeah.
not at all, but I've experienced a lot of things. And I think everyone is entitled to their perspective. And when it comes to their kids, oh my goodness, now being a new dad, I give it to, of course, it's yours. They're your beautiful, beautiful children. And we all have a varying degree of attachment and connectedness to our children's education. I always say our kids are out of luck because they have two educators as parents. And so they're going to come home and we're going to do all these awesome things like read 1,000 books and go outside 1,000 hours and be attuned to the things that are going to help them grow up to be a well-balanced human. And we'll be there at the dinner table helping them because we can. Some parents have to work 2 or 3 jobs, so they can't.
Yep.
Some parents don't speak the language. And so the accessing what's happening and coming to the house, it may not be possible.
Yep.
Right. Math is one of the biggest examples where a lot of folks take an immigrant parent. Maybe they didn't get the level of education on a math level that their kids are. And so I taught middle school for 7 years, and some of my students would say, I have a higher IQ in terms of math right now than my parents. When I say, hey, can you get some support or ask somebody in the home? And this is a village, right? We hear that all the time. It takes a village to raise a kid. And we are just one element of the village. So here's how I get around the parent thing. How I do it is I reach out immediately at the beginning of the year and I introduce myself, my motives, where I come from, my history, just a brief introduction before we get to parent teacher conferences, before we get to open house where it's a hat dance and you see them for 2 minutes and like 10% of the parents end up coming. And everyone gets an email from me and it's explaining where we're coming from. It's explaining the place of love, of support, of emotional support if they need it, if they ask for it. And the problem is when that's how I get around it. And I have very few parent situations where they're saying, what are you doing? Why is this a thing that is happening? Right? Because they know why it's happening. So you lead
So
with
you
the why,
laid,
I
it's all
guess.
about
You lay
expectation
the foundation.
management. Yeah,
Sure. So that
absolutely.
way
Yeah,
they know it's happening and they can ask questions at the beginning. And then you just open up the lines of communication. And
makes
throughout the
sense.
year, you get a couple people saying, like I do social justice and injustice as a theme for Spanish too. And we talk about immigration and migrant workers and some controversial things. And instead of just all of a sudden having some run the risk of a student going home and saying, we're talking about immigration, and maybe the parent has some holdups with immigration, right? Is right or left of the
Sure.
sort of where we are, and getting on the internet machine and sending an angry email, they say, of course, this is where they're coming from. These are the themes. We've heard it before. And so I get one instead of maybe 10
Yeah.
questions. I always get one because
Mhm.
there's always going to be a parent who disagrees. And you have to welcome that. We live in the
Sure.
United States of America. We live in the world. You have to welcome that. You have to expect it and you have to love it. Whenever I get those, at first, when I was a 22-year-old educator, I was like, oh no, they're attacking my profession and you feel personally attacked. But now after over a decade, you say, this is a gift. This is feedback, right? This is feedback from our clients. Our clients are the parents and the students and the communities.
I think that's a really healthy way to look at it. I'm not sure that I could be that healthy. I think that I would
You
take a
have to
lot
be.
more exception. This is why one of many reasons I'm not an educator, John.
Yeah.
And
I also have to say I'm not let's say not every educator thinks the way that I do, right? We are so deeply um, we're so deeply involved with what we do.
yeah,
Almost every one of us as parents and educators, that when something like that happens and we get critical feedback, where we're so invested in what we're doing and you've got the ship going and somebody says, nope, you're going to stop and do a checkpoint. It's so hard to not take that personally. Um,
Absolutely. It's
and,
not just educators, it's everybody.
it's
So
not, it's
working in
everyone.
HR, that
Yeah.
is the hardest thing to teach anybody, is how to give constructive and not just, jerky feedback, and then how to take it as well. And
Yeah.
and learning to take it as a gift as opposed to an attack, which is
Yeah.
how everybody defaults to.
Yeah.
So that was great. I derailed you from your list of other things
Yeah.
besides PBL, and I want to go back because that was a
Cool.
fascinating list. So
Okay.
let's hear more. We've got the emotional 360
Yep.
perspective. We've got PBL. What's next?
Right. So beyond PBL and whole child education,
Mhm.
you're looking at supporting students that come from trauma histories, that
Okay.
have trauma histories, which is a lot more students than you would think. It's not just this,
Especially these days, I think
especially these days. Exactly.
trauma doesn't just mean that, you watch somebody be murdered in front of
Exactly.
you. Trauma means
Exactly.
a thousand things, up
Got
to
yelled
and
at.
include. Yeah,
Totally. Emotional.
absolutely.
So beyond our training every year of becoming a reporter, right? A mandated reporter for these things. I've had to call in 6 times over the past 14 years to those types of things, but it's the little things, the things that you wouldn't call in for,
Mhm.
to the Child Protective Services. So that trying to get to your place of peace and trying to get to a place where your students feel love and support so that you can meet them and create a trauma safe space so that
Mhm.
they can feel accepted and included, and the space is there so they can learn in the first place. So that is a big conversation that's happening in our education climate. Another thing that we're looking at is anti-racist stuff, and I lived in St. Louis, Missouri for 15 years. That's where I first started teaching. I've lived in Boston. I've lived in some places that have different poles. You're from Texas, and you can sort of generalize how people think, which is kind of dangerous when you do that. But St. Louis is a little bit more on the conservative end of things when it comes to racism, and it's a lot more black and white, almost literally, right, from
Mhm.
East St. Louis and North St. Louis. So that's the perspective that I grew up in. I lived in West County, and so we're thinking about anti-racist curriculum. We're thinking about inclusive language with our folks that identify in a different way than binary as a gender
Mhm.
identity, with
Yep.
folks that are from the LGBTQ plus community. I work at a school that is a school of choice, and a lot of our amazing students come from these incredible walks of life, and a subset of our students, maybe I don't want to put a number around it, but let's say 10% of our students are from the LGBTQ plus community,
Uh-huh.
and it is so upsetting, the perspective of other students and, quite frankly, other people of our school, because folks are openly gay. We have
Mhm.
been called like the gay school or the school for gays, as if that's a bad thing,
I say
and as
I'm
if that's a thing that
increasingly thinking I should send my children there.
I
The
just
time
it's just
comes.
it's so upsetting,
Sure.
because our job is not, I mean, I have my own opinions about these things, right? I have my
Yeah.
own religion or lack of religion, but it's not about me as a teacher to say those out loud to my students or my class. It's about including every single one of the humans in front of us for their diversity of skin color, ethnicity, race, of gender identity, of sexual preference, whatever it is. That is our job, to include everyone, because as soon as you say something or do something to isolate, I think we've lost. I think
So
you've made it about your own thoughts and your own agenda. If I had my own agenda, then there would be people automatically disenfranchised from my class,
so I'm
right?
going to push back a tiny bit on
Sure.
what most of what you said there. It would be hard to argue with, but we are having a national dialogue right now about how representation matters, and that
Absolutely.
we have the first female vice president, and she's not just female, she's a
Yes.
minority.
Mhm.
And you could argue that for children, that children innately live in an echo chamber, not of their own creation, that
Mhm.
are of the
That's good.
family and friends that the adults in their life created for them. And that having representation for something outside of that echo chamber whatever that may be, come from an educator
Mm-hmm.
can't be bad.
Mm-hmm.
And giving them the opportunity to say, hey, here's somebody that I like who thinks totally different from everybody that I get to socialize with,
Right.
that's actually a growth opportunity. So one of the things you
Mm-hmm.
said was, I keep my opinions to myself. It's not my place
Mm-hmm.
to say what I think about those. But is that true? I mean, are we doing kids a disservice if we
Mm-hmm.
are not representing what we are? I'm
Sure.
thinking I have a lot of friends that are LGBTQ plus educators,
Right. Sure.
and they get pushback for having rainbow flags in their schools.
Yeah.
They've had pushbacks for being absolutely, am I married to somebody of the same sex? Yes, I am. Is it any of your
Right.
business? No, it is not.
Right.
Like,
Right.
so where is the line, and where do you kind of fall on that idea that actually your opinions are a good way to
Yeah.
help them have representation of something different?
So I want to bring in my own identity for a second. I'm a white male. I'm heterosexual, and have been delivered privileges as a result of those things
Yep.
at my birth in society. I recognize those. I see the privilege that comes out of them, and I'm deeply grateful for them. I don't, and have not had to work through some of the things that some of my students and communities and team members and friends have to on a daily basis and have had to. However, I can openly be an ally to those folks that have been downtrodden by
Absolutely.
whatever force.
Yep.
And I think that's what I'm talking about, Michelle.
Okay.
I think just if everyone, I mean, this sort of seems like a Narnia existence, right? But if everyone was an ally to everyone else on the sort of social level, right, on these like levels where we came together as a community at school and
Mm-hmm.
at the supermarket and whatever, and maybe you don't like purple skinned people in your home, but every time you go out you smile and you at least act civil, and maybe you don't like how somebody speaks with a certain accent, and you I'm just using like ridiculous
Sure, sure,
examples,
sure. Yeah.
and every time you hear that accent it makes you cringe. But instead of cringing and treating them with negativity, you just look at them, smile, and you treat them with the honor and humanity that they deserve.
You have no
I
idea
think
how close to the bone you are on that one, John. I
if
hate Texas accent, and every time I go out, I just got to smile and nod.
smile and nod, and it doesn't. So what I'm saying is, it doesn't matter. I'll give you Keith Olbermann. Keith Olbermann's a pretty like touchy person. Just to say his name, everyone conjures up a thought, right? Because of his history. But he said something a long time ago when he was going through with his listeners. And I think it was one of the things that got him off of one of his networks. He's had some controversy around him, but he looked at the camera and he was talking about, I think specifically he was talking about gay marriage and just folks being, attracted to something other than the opposite sex, the opposite gender. And he looks at the camera and he says, "What is it to you?" And he stopped and waited for about 10 seconds. And it was like he was talking to me because I come from my own prejudices. I come from my own upbringing where my parents said what they said, and my dad said what he said, and my mom said what they said. And to their, that's what they did. They could say what they want. They were
Sure.
parenting. And then as soon as I have other students in front of me, I am so careful to not present myself physically over somebody who might be smaller. I'm going to get down on the ground, right? It's not just how we think or how we believe, it's how we act.
Sure.
I'm generally a pretty serious person. And some of my greatest feedback from middle schoolers and high schoolers is Hinthorne, smile. Smile a little bit more, right?
Let me tell you,
So,
as a woman in business, we hear that a
ah,
lot, and we're not as big of fans. I'm not gonna lie, John.
so it's good to know we're all getting the same feedback, right? We're all getting this sort of commentary to grow as humans. And it just, as hunky dory as this sounds, it boils down to, are we going to choose to love and see each other as humans? Are we going to do that? Or are we going to continue having these differences, whether they be religious or social or whatever sort of outside form they have? Are we going to let them pin ourselves against each other? And it's up to us. As educators and parents, I think primarily as we raise the future, literally, to be inclusive and be supportive and have your own thoughts and opinions. Definitely. I have people that are proudly conservative and proudly, Democrats and progressives already in my classroom. And we create a space for everyone so that when somebody who's conservative is speaking to somebody who's not conservative, they're listening. And I think that is a huge breakthrough that education is about to have. I think some schools are having it. Our school has it. We're blessed to have it, but there's some schools that are back a little bit. They're hesitant because of the fear of what inclusivity feels like and looks
Sure.
like. It's new.
Yeah.
Because you might be sitting in a community that hasn't done it yet, or hasn't put aside some of the bigotry or some of the, if it's that strong, or just some of the implicit bias, if it's sort of back in the implicit nature. So not to get too psychological, but all those sorts of things go inside of my head as I log on. Right. I know that there are people who are struggling to get breakfast or didn't get breakfast because they couldn't. And I know that there are some students who are struggling with whether or not to come out of the proverbial closet tomorrow, and this is the thing that drives me absolute bonkers. I have some students that are coming from suicidal ideation the previous night. And if that is the case, if that is our reality, and us as educators and parents are not coming from a place of love, I think we're exacerbating the situation. I think we are, I wouldn't say complicit in some of this stuff, but I think we are missing an opportunity.
I think that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, I think
supporting them.
I think that's fair.
And I come from a really conservative family. I'll give you a little background. My mom was a staunch right-wing conservative. Her dad was from Dallas, and her dad owned slaves in a plantation in Mississippi. That's my background. So like I'm not coming from anything other than probably one of the strictest right-wing environments. But the more I've traveled the globe to the 17 countries that I've been to with my piano music, I've gotten a chance to spend it all and get on planes and go see other cultures and other people. I realize that the thing that connects us is not our differences as a weakness. It's our differences as a strength.
I think that the more you get out and experience, I think that's pretty universal, that the more you experience other people, it's just really hard to hold hate in your heart when you consistently encounter joy and you consistently encounter love in 1,000 different guises and 1,000 different colors. And I think that if we sent everybody around the world to meet a bunch of people, that probably we would end a lot of the issues that we have. We'd have a lot more.
Some people don't get out of their town, Michelle. Some people never get out of their town.
Yeah,
I don't know what the statistic is, but there's a lot of people in our country, in our world, that never get out of their town. Yeah. Their entire lives. They stay in their town, their county, their province. They don't cross a border, and that I think is something that is unique to my experience. And as a Spanish language and Latin American and Hispanic studies teacher, and social studies teacher and math teacher, right, with PBL and all that sort of stuff, socio-emotional learning teacher and parent.
Trauma learner.
How many hats do we? Yeah, exactly. As I distill all of that and have another 15, 20 years in my career, hopefully staying in the classroom, maybe doing this podcast as I go through and learn from other teachers, you realize that it just boils down to a simple thing. Are you going to make this and keep this about the students, your clients? So as I got this job, I know that this is like, how do I get this job? I wanted to share with your listeners, if there's any teachers that are trying to get a teaching job, the number one thing that I have showed and said that is a value of mine, that I have gotten feedback from my hirers, is flexibility.
Okay. How do you demonstrate flexibility as an
Absolutely.
applicant?
You can do that throughout the application. You can be supportive in your emails. You can allow for patience and in the process that sometimes takes a long time. When you get there and you're waiting in the lobby, you can show that you're being flexible. You can talk about it. You can, exactly. You can be open and supportive and get to know the lobbyist or the secretary or whoever's greeting you, the student. Those are all active things that you can do to show that, and then talk in the actual interview about things and stories that have been really tough and you have had to be patient or peaceful or pivot in some sort of way away from your agenda to meet somebody where they needed to be met. And that's teaching in a nutshell, right? We have a
Yeah.
lesson plan, but 99% of the time it doesn't go the way that you originally planned it.
You mean,
So
wait a minute. That makes it sound like you have a hard job, Jon. And I feel like that can't be real. I feel
yeah,
like children are very compliant, especially at
exactly.
the
They do
teenage
exactly
level.
what we want them to do.
Every
Yeah,
time, every
exactly.
time. So on that, that was really good advice. With that, if somebody wants to, because we get people that we do resumes for teachers, and I told you I
Mhm.
do, career coaching and all that. If we have somebody who really, really wants to come across as an unconventional teacher and
Mhm.
just wants, like, as soon as that resume hits the principal's desk, it's going to jump off the page at them that I'm not going to hand out worksheets and read from a textbook. Um,
Right.
then what would your main suggestion be for them?
Speak softly.
Carry a big stick.
Initially. Yeah. I mean, we work within a system, and there are people that came before you,
Okay.
and there are people that built the ship that you're on. And for you to go in and sort of say whatever you're going to say, it may be really warranted. You may be the biggest expert in the room, but I think going in and spending the first year or two as a learner, as a questioner, as a person focused on building relationships with the other teachers, with your parents, with your community, and rocking your style, you're going to get noticed, and you're going to get respected, and you're going to have that, base sort of to fall back on when you do go out and say, hey, I think I'm going to go full PBL. I think I'm going to go all organic language. And like me, I didn't use desks. My principal looked at me and said, what do you want me to do with the tables? And I was like, no, it's fine. We'll just put them at the outside. I'm going to figure it out. But just so you know, don't freak out. We're going to put all the desks on the outside. We're just going to be in chairs, and we're going to be communicating, rolling around, and doing that sort of stuff. And that was in year 3 of me being here, right? The first 2 years,
Sure.
I was learning and asking and sharing, and not coming in with this sort of desire to and then plan to implement all these changes. Because anytime you take on a new job, there was someone before you, right?
Mhm.
There was another teacher. My wife started teaching in the middle of a year. She literally had somebody retire. And so she took on
Oh,
all of the
wow.
processes and
That's a
all of
lot.
the
Yeah.
strategies, like literally in the middle of the year. Right. And so we talked often as like, what is my role? She asked. And I said, just to continue on and drive the ship that you didn't create. And the next year you can maybe start taking down the paint and put a new paint on.
Making it,
Um,
but softly, softly,
we,
catchy monkey,
we don't
not just
totally,
jump in and make things splash.
totally.
I think that's great
Yeah.
advice,
And so
really, for anywhere.
yeah,
So, um,
absolutely. In any sector.
so we are running out of time rapidly. I really appreciate your time, but I know you have small people and things to do.
I
Is there
do.
anything else you want to add before we go? We will have notes. We have links in the show notes, everything
Mhm.
to the Unconventional Teacher podcast, which is
Thank
really
you.
great and fascinating.
Thanks. It's
So
getting better and better and better. We have entire statewide Teachers of the Year coming on our show. The first Indigenous woman to get the honor of Arizona Teacher of the Year in 2020.
Oh,
Lynette
wow.
Stantz, the current 2021 Oregon Teacher of the Year, who's also a member of 2 tribes as an Indigenous woman. We have the first
Fantastic.
African American to earn the History Teacher of the Year in 2017 for the state of Massachusetts. I mean, the honor is all mine. The privilege is all mine to be able to access these humans who are also teachers. That's our common connection. But to talk with them and then put together a short podcast, it's 10 to 20 minutes long, because teachers and really everyone, how much extra time do we have? And so we're putting that on. And so I encourage anybody to check it out, give us a review, come and support us on Patreon, because little old me, a single income teacher, is trying to put this on so that we can amplify and unify the voices of these unapologetically unconventional teachers. And now, the more I uncover this rock, the more I realize there's more and more teachers out there that are taking risks and being bold for the sake of their students. So it's super exciting. The last piece of advice, I think, if I'm presumptuous to have advice, I think is just to be authentically you.
Okay.
Be
I think that's
authentically
always good.
you. Yeah. As a teacher, if you start losing who you are and your North Star and what's most meaningful for you,
Mhm.
I think you have lost the battle. And then the other one is keep it about the students.
I think
So
that to be
thank you so much for
authentically
having
you.
me on.
No
This has
worries.
been
I
super cool.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for all your time, John. And like I said, we'll have all of the contact details so people can find you on Patreon and listen to your
Great.
podcast. And thanks again. Thanks for tuning in to Hey, I Want Your Job. You've been listening to Hey, I Want Your Job. For more information on how you can get your own awesome job, visit ONH Consulting at www.onhconsulting.com. We offer incredible resumes, no nonsense career advice, and real world tips for landing a job in today's market. Check us out on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Insta for more insider information. Soon, you'll be hearing us say, I'm Michelle Olivier, and hey, I want your job.